how Judy Garland's struggles led her into an unhappy life. The Untold Truth of Judy Garland. In the Wizard of Oz movie, Judy Garland utters one of the most iconic phrases in cinematic history. "Toto, I've a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore." There isn't a single list of best Hollywood movies that doesn't include The Wizard of Oz. Judy Garland was the poster child for old Hollywood glamour. After starring in 1939's The Wizard of Oz, the teenage actress was catapulted into fame. While Dorothy touched American hearts in her search for happiness over the rainbow, the actress behind the wholesome character would never find it. Behind the scenes of her hit movies, Garland's life was marred by a lifelong drug addiction passed to her as a child through the hands of her very own mother. Garland was tormented by studio executives manipulating her every move, from starving her on a diet of coffee and cigarettes to pushing her to abort her first child. Still, Garland was taught at a very young age that the show must go on. And it did, even if that often meant dosing herself with amphetamines to stay awake and covering the self-inflicted scars on her wrists. Garland spent her life looking for Oz and dreaming of a place somewhere over the rainbow, where the world was shiny and technicolor. Unfortunately, the yellow brick road through Hollywood would never lead her there. Whereas the movie ends on a happy note, in real life some of the Wizard of Oz cast members were facing problems and challenges in their personal lives that their fans would never know. Until now, here are some of their stories. To say Judy Garland had an unhappy childhood would be putting it mildly. She was born to a bisexual father who got run out of town more than once for hitting on young boys. Judy's birth name was Frances Gum, and after her parents took her and two sisters to California, the three girls began singing as the Gum Sisters. In the early 1930s, she was signed by MGM and began churning out 3, 4 and 5 movies a year, often with Mickey Rooney. To keep her alert and lively, the studio began giving her daily doses of amphetamines. By the time she landed the role of Dorothy in the Wizard of Oz movie, she was a teenage drug addict. Biographers will later discover that during her teenage years at MGM, and long before Harvey Weinstein showed up on the scene, some of the studio's top brass were propositioning her and occasionally acting in inappropriate ways. This including head honcho Louis B. Mayer, who allegedly would occasionally place his hand on one of her breasts. Just like Clark Gable and Vivien Leigh, who were filming Gone with the Wind on nearby MGM sound stages, Judy Garland and her co-stars had no idea their movie would one day become one of America's most beloved films. Garland went on to a string of unhappy and failed marriages. During her first marriage, Judy's mother forced her to have an abortion when she found out Judy was pregnant. Garland's second marriage was to bisexual filmmaker Vincent Minnelli, who was the father of their daughter, Liza. During the 30 years after she filmed The Wizard of Oz, Judy would have affairs with celebrities like Orson Welles, Tyrone Power, band leader Artie Shaw, and occasionally other women. Her penchant for booze and pills began to spiral out of control, and she graduated to morphine and heroin, sometimes sneaking into the bathrooms at friends' homes looking for prescription drugs. As her addiction became more powerful, she began to lose her mental health, twice setting her home on fire and ending up in mental health facilities more than once, often treated for depression, which today medical experts describe as bipolar disease. Despite all the happiness, singing and dancing Judy did in her many movies, her sad life was largely filled with emptiness, exploitation and scandal. Maybe they should have called them the Little Rascals, because a lot of these wee folk were indeed rascally. Many of the Munchkins had recently come to America from Europe and didn't speak English, but that didn't stop them from enjoying raucous parties and annoying 16-year-old star Judy Garland. One of her husbands once said some of the Munchkin men would put their hands up under her dress. Garland later said one of the 40-year-old midgets asked her out to dinner, once telling interviewer Jack Parr, "They were little drunks. They got smashed every night." Nearly 2 decades ago, while researching a book about Judy Garland, biographer Gerald Clark stumbled on an old gossip column noting that his subject was working on a memoir for Random House. This piqued Clark's curiosity. He later told Entertainment Weekly. No memoir had ever appeared. Clark sent his research assistant to Columbia University's library, where the publisher stores its archives, to see if there were any letters about the project. There were 30. "Oh, by the way," the researcher said, "there's also an autobiography." It was incomplete, just 68 pages, but Clark was startled by what he discovered in those pages, that Garland, one of the world's most famous actresses, was groped and harassed repeatedly by Louis B. Mayer, the famed producer and co-founder of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Studios. With the world fixated and disgusted by sexual harassment allegations by actresses and actors against some of the biggest names in Hollywood, Harvey Weinstein, Kevin Spacey, Louis C.K., Dustin Hoffman, it is worth remembering that this intolerable behaviour has been tolerated in showbiz as long as there have been bright lights. The historical victims include Marilyn Monroe, Beverly Adland, Joan Collins and even Shirley Temple, all of whom described being molested and other abuses in their own memoirs. Everyone knows about the Hollywood casting couches, Clark said at an interview with ABC News, but nobody thought that Judy had been subjected to any pressure from the higher-ups at MGM. It started around the time Garland was playing Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. She was 16. Having sex with the female help was regarded as a perk of power, and few women escaped the demands of Mayer and his underlings, Clark wrote in Get Happy, The Life of Judy Garland, painting a stomach-turning portrait of the abuse. Between the ages of 16 and 20, Judy herself was to be approached for tryst, and approached again and again. "Don't think they all didn't try," she said. Top on the list was Mayer himself. Whenever he complimented her on her voice, she sang from the heart, he said. Mayer would invariably place his hand on her left breast to show just where her heart was. "I often thought I was lucky," observed Judy, "that I didn't sing with another part of my anatomy." That scenario, a compliment followed by a grope, was repeated many times until, grown up at last, Judy put a stop to it. "Mr. Mayer, don't you ever do that again. she finally had the courage to say, "I just will not stand for it." How did Mayer react? He cried. "How can you say that to me who loves you?" he asked Garland, who described her scorn for him decades later in her unpublished memoir, writing that it's amazing how these big men who had been around so many sophisticated women all their lives could act like idiots. If Mayer was the most persistent, he was not the most vile, Clark writes. Another executive, Judy did not identify him, summoned her to his office, as he had summoned so many other more glamorous metro stars. Eschewing any pretense of small talk, he demanded that she, too, have slept with him. Yes or no, right now, that was his style, Judy recalled. When she refused, he began screaming. "Listen, you, before you go, I want to tell you something. I'll ruin you, and I can do it. I'll break you if it's the last thing I do." In addition to being threatened and harassed, Garland was hounded to lose weight and made to feel ugly. She abused drugs and alcohol and died in 1969 of an apparent accidental overdose of barbiturates. She was 47 years old. There is an ironic and disturbing coda to Clark's discovery of the abuse Garland endured. In 2009, about a decade after the biography was published, the Hollywood trade journals were abuzz after the book was optioned for a movie, that Garland would come alive again on screen, played by Anne Hathaway. "It's a very sensitive project," Hathaway told the BBC in 2010, "and there have been so many stories told about her life that we're really trying to get it right." The movie has not yet made it into production, and it seems even more unlikely now.